Hey, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Happy election day. It's election day here in the United States. Midterm elections. A little nervous about it. If you're watching this and you live in the United States and you haven't made a plan to vote today, please make a plan to vote and do so. There's lots of organizations out there who can help you understand where your polling place is, what your rights are, when you can vote, what you need to vote, all of those things. We believe in the power of the vote here, and we want everyone to exercise their constitutional right, whether we agree with them or not. So we are here to talk about literally everything not voting related on the cancel culture watch today. Boy, it's been an eventful few days. It's like this has changed. Different things that I was going to focus on has changed multiple times over the past 3 days. But we've got a lot of entries for our various segments, and I'm excited to get to them. As you can see, I am not joined by Dr. Kristen. She is literally speaking at an event near her home place outside Philadelphia as we speak. She sends her love and her regards. And that leaves me to share the good news and the bad news on this week's cancel culture watch. I sigh. But let's get to it. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's Cancel Culture Watch, formerly Empathy Exercises, formerly The Good Doctors Diagnose. We have rebranded it Cancel Culture Watch, not because we believe in cancel culture, because Dave Chappelle is hosting SNL this week. So please tell me how he has been canceled. We don't believe that you can actually cancel people. We believe a lot of cancel culture is about accountability and representation and respect. And we would but accountability culture watch doesn't sound as good and the algorithm doesn't love it. So we're calling it cancel culture watch, but PSA out of the way. We don't really believe people are canceled in this culture, but we watch the culture for things around those natures that have to do with whether or not people should be held accountable or what it all means. So thanks for joining me through my rambles, Jay. We've already been talking today about what one of the topics I will be covering in a minute. But let's get started. As we announced the last time we did Cancel Culture Watch, we now have segments, which is exciting. Eventually, we're going to have graphics and sound to go with the segments, and it's going to be super fun. But for now, we just have the segments, and you have to deal with just me announcing them. But first up is our updates for this week. And the first update we have is that CVS, Walmart, and Walgreens have agreed to pay $13.8 billion to settle U.S. opioid crisis claims. This will resolve thousands of U.S. state and local government lawsuits accusing the pharmacy chains of mishandling opioid painkillers, filling prescriptions, allowing pill mills to continue, all these kinds of things. We've spent a lot of time covering the opioid crisis on our YouTube, and in fairness, Jay, Sarah Sivian, our beloved Sarah Sivian from the Too Many Men podcast, is my inspiration for the segments, without a doubt. And obviously, I was like, we don't have a name yet for updates. We can't take Bido News because they have Bido News and I love them. But yeah, that's where kind of the segment idea came from. And then we had to add a little bit of our humor to it. But I love that reference. Yeah. Imagine it will be, hopefully. I can only hope to be as glorious as Bido News and the phenomenal Sarah Sivian. But returning to this, one of the lawyers who negotiated for the governments says, we know that reckless, profit-driven dispensing practices fueled the crisis, but we know just as surely that with better systems in place and proper heeding of red flag warnings, pharmacies can play a direct role in reducing opioid abuse and in saving lives. So we're big fans of accountability, and hopefully this lawsuit and the agreements contained within that lawsuit will lead to more accountability and a lot more mechanisms in place to help combat any sort of prescription medication based addiction crisis, opioids or not. So as per usual, we're always keeping an eye on these kinds of informations. We thank our friends at the Globe, as I've been told it is called, not the Globe and Mail. We call it the Globe, for this bit of reporting. Another update that we have for you ties to our Colonizers World Tour coverage earlier this year. We talked about Ethiopia and spent quite a while talking about the ongoing civil war between the Ethiopian government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which is a separatist movement in the Tigray region of northern Ethiopia. And we had news this week that after 2 years of this civil conflict, the Ethiopian government and the leadership of the TPLF have agreed to stop fighting as a part of a deal that hopefully will have a path out of this conflict. This is not something we talk a lot about in the news, mostly because it's Black people killing Black people. And that doesn't tend to make Western news as something we should pay attention to. It is worth remembering that over 500,000 people have been killed in this conflict, with over 1 million displaced. And so, we like to follow international news because we live in a global society. And we encourage all of our friends and neighbors to do the same. So very often our updates contain international news because we're like, hey, this happened and you should know about it. So we will obviously be keeping an eye on whether or not this ceasefire holds and if the conflict evolves in Ethiopia to hopefully move away from the violent conflict that has plagued that region for the last 2 years. All right, next up in our segments is our fantastic segment, Not All Men, but Definitely This Fucking Guy. We have 2 entries in this segment today. The first one being Kyrie Irving. If you haven't been following this, he shared recently in the last few weeks on his social media clips from a film that is anti-Semitic. He has spoken out saying he is not anti-Semitic, but, the video doesn't lie on this one, kids. So I don't want to place a whole lot of judgment on Kyrie Irving, but he is certainly making a lot of public statements that are anti-Semitic. And we talked about Ye, formerly Kanye West, last week, and we're talking about Kyrie Irving this week. But the Brooklyn Nets have stepped in to suspend him for at least 5 games for the post, and they've released this statement saying that he is currently unfit to be associated with the Brooklyn Nets. I don't know how he's going to become fit, whatever that means, in 5 games, or what kind of mechanisms they have put in place to hold him accountable. We believe 100% in second chances for humans. We believe in the endless capacity for humans to change, but you have to work for it and you have to earn it. I'll be talking about that a little bit more later when I get to the NHL. So I don't know how they are going to document how he is changing. The suspension without pay will be lifted once he satisfies a series of objective remedial measures. Cool. What do those mean? How are you engaging with victims of anti-Semitism? What are we doing in terms of restoring any sort of faith in his ability to understand the harm that he has caused? Lots of questions for the Brooklyn Nets. But yeah, not all men, but definitely this fucking guy. Falling into this category as well. You guys, I have to talk about Elon Musk. I think it's time. Not all men, but definitely this fucking guy. So in case you've been living under a rock for the last 4 days, Elon Musk is just shitting all over everything Twitter might have ever been that was positive. And I mean, they picked such a great picture here, our friends at Complex. But this is a great kind of like timeline of what has happened. He bought Twitter, he overpaid for it, he backed out of the deal. He said he was going to give back, bring back everyone to the platform who had been banned, including former President Trump. He walked into headquarters with a sink because he's terrible. And then, particularly in the last week, what has come out is his plans for verification fees. So usually the blue check used to mean that like the account had gone through a number of steps to become verified so that you knew you were getting information from, say, the account for Ryan Reynolds. The blue check meant that they had done the due diligence. They confirmed that was in fact actor, entrepreneur, possible future owner of the Ottawa Senators, Ryan Reynolds. You can believe that when he says he's Ryan Reynolds, he is Ryan Reynolds. So Musk got rid of that verification process and said, for $8 a month, you can pay me for a blue check, which just takes any sort of accountability verification out of the process of Twitter. He originally wanted to charge $20, but was shamed into taking it down to $8 by Stephen King. You can't make this stuff up. There's a lot of ramifications coming from this. Researchers are saying hate speech is already on the rise. He has threatened to permanently suspend parody accounts. So all of his behavior, though he is claiming that he is doing this for free speech, all of his behavior has been contradictory to that, in that he is limiting free speech. And in a lot of ways, especially free speech that critiques Twitter or that critiques him or that makes fun of him. And I feel bad for what appears to be quite a fragile ego and the disaster he is leaving behind him. I agree, Jay. It is surreal. Dr. Kristen and I were together last week running the first Belief and Belonging Festival with our dear friend Cheryl Westleong in Waco, Texas. And so we were talking about this together as we were driving around Waco, running errands and making plans and working from the hotel. And, the thing that is most alarming this week anyway. I mean, it's hard to keep up with this news story, but last Thursday evening, it was reported that Twitter employees were going to find out Friday morning at 9 a.m. whether or not they still had a job, literally based on an email they received in their inbox. He has fired almost the entire team that was responsible for verifying misinformation. He has fired almost the whole team that was responsible for political ads and managing sort of election related information. We have reports that because of this massive string of firings, there's always then a percentage of people who quit based on all the firings. So, we fired half the workforce. We could see upwards of 25% of people quitting, including a lot of engineers who have the institutional knowledge to run the tech and run it safely and securely. So as of now, Abby Research, Dr. Kristen, and I are still on Twitter, but it's a rapidly changing situation. We're keeping a weather eye on it. Dr. Kristen is of the firm belief that this is not sustainable and that what he is doing is in fact just killing Twitter. And so we will see what happens with that and whether, the next time we see you guys for Cancel Culture Watch, we in fact still have a Twitter. I don't know. It's baffling, but also not surprising given the circumstances. And I think the thing that Dr. Kristen and I found most abhorrent about the mass firings was that it was a huge violation of California labor law, which I can't imagine he didn't know because he has enough money in this planet to afford a lawyer. And the scary thing is he has so much money that both Dr. Kristen and I's supposition was that he knew he was going to get sued for violating the labor laws. He knew he could potentially face a massive class action lawsuit from all of these people getting together, that they were fired without the required 60-day notice by the state of California. And he built that into his plan to take over and was like, well, I can afford to pay the class action lawsuit. And when you have that much money and that much power that you can trample all over people's hard fought for employment and labor rights, that is something we should all be very, very, very concerned about. Our friend Jay says that the Canadian government has paused all Twitter advertising since it's such a mess right now. That is wise. I don't know if the American government is paying attention to that right now because we've got this little thing of midterm elections, but a wise move, I would say, by our friends north of the border. So that concludes this week's segment of Not All Men, but definitely this fucking guy. And we tried to build the segments so that we can go from bad to good, happy to sad, etc. So moving from the Not All Men category, we are now going to do a stopover in Representation Matters, which I'm very excited comes from, again, our friends north of the border at the CBC. News of an all-Indigenous production of Grease, which is currently making its way across Ontario, I believe. This report comes from Thunder Bay. So I think they're working their way across the treaties, the treaty territories, and it's a wonderful story about kind of adapting a lot of the story to and include Indigenous storylines and plot points. You can see a lot of the beadwork here, even though an Oilers beaded necklace, which I question his support of America's team, but love the beadwork. So it's set to be performed in Thunder Bay, Ontario in early November before moving on to Western Canada. So if you are north of the border and you are able to go out and support this production, it sounds like it's going to be phenomenal. It was co-written by Crystal Lightning and her husband, MC Red Cloud, and was originally planned, Bear Grease, it's called, obviously, for students at a school in Enoch Cree First Nation, but the pandemic put a pause on that. They were requested to play it at the Edmonton Fringe, and then they decided to dust off the script and make a production of it. So excited to hear about it. If any of our Canadian friends and followers happen to make it to this performance, please let us know. I know, Jay, it's not particular. It's like starting in Thunder Bay and then going west, which is not really helpful for you. But representation matters, and especially in kind of iconic pop culture roles like this, to have it be reimagined with Native voices and Native storytellers. And they're making sure that they reference every place that they go to. So they were going to be in Treaty 6 territory, which is Cree territory, and they put some Cree words into the script so that it was specific to the audiences they were speaking at. But they also, the creators, Lightning and Red Cloud, also made sure to say this is not just for Indigenous audiences. And so all folks who are going to be either in Thunder Bay or west of that in the next couple months, please make sure and check out Bear Grease and then let us know how it was. All right, our ping pongs from good segments to bad segments. Next up is the segment, This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things, which I'm just singing like Taylor Swift in my head. This is why we can't have nice things, because you break them. The thing we're talking about today that is broken is in large part the NHL, but also its treatment of players with head injuries and the seriousness and lack of seriousness with which they take towards CTE and head injuries. So the news is coming out from our Canadian sports reporter, Rick Westhead. Would it be a cancel culture watch if I did not have an article from Rick Westhead? I don't know. But he reports that on the anniversary of the death of Marek Svatos, who played 8 NHL seasons in part for the Colorado Avalanche, his wife announced that his posthumous diagnosis was that he had CTE, excuse me. He died, Svatos died in 2016 at the age of 34 at his home in Lone Tree, Colorado. A coroner reported that he had codeine, morphine, and anti-anxiety medication in his system when he died. The official cause of death was an accidental overdose, his wife Diana said. But she shared in this interview with TSN on the anniversary of his death how her husband suffered through at least half a dozen documented concussions and at least as many surgeries during his NHL career after being drafted by Colorado in the 7th round of the 2001 entry draft. So shout out to Diana Svatos for telling this story. She said that one of the main reasons she wanted to now is to help other NHL families to spread awareness about CTE and the ramifications of it. And so, if this is kind of a double-edged, it's both a good story in that we're talking more about it, but as Jay just said, it is heartbreaking that we are still talking about it in a way that is not necessarily taking the impact of head injuries seriously, particularly in the NHL. So that is This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things. We can't have nice things because we aren't taking head injuries as seriously as we should be in all professional sports, but for this particular article for the NHL. And then we're moving on to another not so happy segment, which is Accountability Corner. As I said at the beginning, cancel culture isn't necessarily a real thing in that people get canceled. It is a real thing in that people talk about being canceled all the time, or who should get canceled, or that someone is canceled. Again, I reference the fact that Dave Chappelle, who has been, in my memory, at least canceled 6 times, is hosting Saturday Night Live on Saturday. So I think he's doing okay. we prefer to frame cancel culture as discussions of accountability. And one of the saddest stories of accountability that we encountered in the last week was the story of the forced outing of Heartstopper's Kit Connor. If you don't know Heartstoppers, it's a phenomenal show on the Netflix. It's a beautiful story of love and understanding and compassion and empathy with a bunch of adorably geeky, nerdy, sometimes queer, some of them queer anyway, not sometimes, some of them queer kids in England, starring Kit Connor, who in the show comes out as bisexual. And what we had in the last couple weeks was a forced outing of Kit on Twitter because he was seen having lunch with one of his female co-stars from a current project that he is working on. The implication being that maybe he wasn't bisexual or maybe he wasn't gay. And a lot of people online pressured him, called it queer baiting, which, Dr. Donnelly and I would like to remind you that a human person can't queer bait other people. And that nobody owes us their sexuality or gender identity. A lot of the arguments coming from the people who wanted him to admit his sexuality was that it was misrepresenting queer folks. It was not giving opportunities to bisexual actors to play this part. And our perspective here at Abbey Research is that because sexuality is so fluid, so much more so than obviously race or gender identity, it's really, really hard to say someone exactly is something all the time on that spectrum of all the possible little bits of the rainbow that make up the sexuality spectrum. So because it is something that is so fluid, it changes throughout our lives, it changes throughout relationships. So to say that he has to admit to being bisexual or that he has to be bisexual to play a bisexual character when he's 18 years old is just way too much to put on a person. And, going back to the start of this segment, Accountability Corner, the only person who should decide when a person comes out is themselves, is that person. They should never be forced into a situation where they feel like they have to disclose their sexuality, their gender, anything about themselves, but particularly as we reference coming out having to do with sexuality. He didn't owe us that. He doesn't have to prove he is worthy of the role that he is playing, because it's not the same as a man playing a transgendered woman or a white person playing a black person. That is not the same thing as a young boy who is an actor playing someone who is bisexual and being bisexual or not. And his the fervor to which he received online pressure and online hate forced him from Twitter. And he came back, and this tweet here just absolutely breaks my heart. Back for a minute, I'm bi. Congrats for forcing an 18-year-old to out himself. I think some of you missed the point of the show. And it is 100% such a beautiful show about why it's so important to have time and space to figure out who you are and who you want to be and what kind of relationships you want to be in. And the beautiful message of Heartstopper was not afforded to Kit Connor. and he was not given the time and the space to decide who he is and what kind of relationships he wants to be in and who he loves. And he felt in a lot of ways, and I would argue that he was forced to out himself in order to get all of these naysayers to back off. So this goes in accountability corner because we are holding these people accountable for what is clearly biphobia and clearly discrimination against this beautiful young person who is so super talented. And yeah, I hope if you're listening to this rant still, you just go watch Heartstopper and support him. But it was a really important conversation we felt we needed to have. I talked to Kristen about it a lot last week. I talked to Eleanor about it a lot last week, our other team member. And we really wanted to make sure and bring this up and talk about it carefully and to make those important distinctions, particularly with regards to sexuality and sexual expression. Whew. Okay. Accountability corner done and dusted. Next up is the happy news that we have for you. In our segment, we are calling Good Vibes Only. Only good vibes in this segment, we promise. The first Good Vibes Only entry for this week is the story that beauty queens Miss Argentina and Miss Puerto Rico revealed they have secretly married. And if this is not a Hallmark movie romance novel, someone write it now. Please and thank you. It is the story of beauty queens Mariana Varela and Fabiola Valentin, who met at the Miss Universe. I'm trying to scroll. Yes, they met at the Miss Universe pageant in 2020 and remained friends afterwards, and they got married. It's so adorable. I love this story so much. Find two prettier women, I dare you. But especially in the hyper feminized space of pageants, where I am sure there are a lot of cultural restrictions on performing your femininity or sexuality that is not straight, and a lot of, I would imagine, restrictions on how you can express yourself and whether you can be fully yourself when you are required to be a beauty queen. I don't know. I'm not a part of the pageant world, but I've seen I've seen a couple of documentaries and movies about it that tell me I'm not too far off the mark. But congratulations to Mariana and Fabiola. Felicitations on your union, and I hope you have a lovely marriage together. Also, filed under the segment Good Vibes Only is the news that the Bar Founders Museum in Bar or Barre, Massachusetts. Apologies, I'm not from Massachusetts. I'm not sure how you say it. The Founders Museum in Massachusetts, shall we say, returned over 150 artifacts to members of the Oglala Sioux and Cheyenne River Sioux tribes from South Dakota over the summer, I believe it looks like. There was a 2-hour ceremony held in Massachusetts on Saturday, where these items that are considered sacred and had been stored at this museum were returned to the people it had been taken from. And this is a huge part of larger repatriation efforts in the United States. If you aren't aware, we do have federal legislation requiring the returning of all of these stolen items. It is called the 1990 Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which stipulates that all of these artifacts should be returned to the tribes that they were taken from. As you can imagine, this is a very slow institutional process. So we salute the Founders Museum for recognizing that these artifacts were stolen and do not belong to them and are sacred to the Oglala, Sioux, and Cheyenne River Sioux peoples. So thanks for that. I think they're right when they say the museum will be remembered for being on the right side of history for returning these items. You are correct. The 150 artifacts in question are but a drop in the bucket of the estimated 870,000 Native American artifacts, including nearly 100,000 human remains in the possession of the nation's most prestigious colleges, museums, and even the federal government. So it's an ongoing process. We salute small museums like the Founders Museum for doing the right thing. We encourage all of these museums and colleges and the federal government to return the items that do not belong to them, that are culturally significant to the original inhabitants of this land, and that are sacred to them, including the human remains of their ancestors. So good vibes only for the Founders Museum. And now we will move to our final segment, Make It Make Sense. And I wish I could make this make sense. I'm not sure that I can. And there's a lot of other people who are talking about it and are doing a much better job. I would like to shout out the men at the Athletic Hockey Podcast for their episode this morning, in which they rant angrily for 30 minutes about the ridiculousness of the last 5 days that hockey world and hockey culture has endured. Shout out to my gals at Too Many Men, Sarah and Shayna and Allison, for doing a remarkably beautiful and touching and respectful job talking about this and how difficult it is. Hockey's having a time, y'all. Hockey's having a time because humans play hockey, and humans are in organizations that manage hockey, and they're having a time with a lot of scandals. And the latest scandal dropped at the end of last week when the Boston Bruins announced that they had signed 20-year-old Mitchell Miller to an entry-level contract, including massive rookie signing bonuses. Too long didn't read. Mitchell Miller was convicted in juvenile court 6 years ago of bullying for at least 4 years a young, Black, disabled classmate. He documented for over 4 years, bullied him, belittled him, physically abused him, assaulted him, used racial slurs to talk about him, and was eventually taken to juvenile court and convicted. This is again where we say, please tell me where cancel culture is, because this young man has been given now 2 opportunities to play at the highest level of his sport without showing any movement towards remorse, recognition, and real change. This is not about us, like the woke mob, canceling an 8th grader. This is about holding him accountable for his actions and requiring that in order to be deserving of the honor of playing in the sport's highest league, he has to show change and show that he is not the same person that he was at 14. And y'all, he hasn't done it. He hasn't done the work. And so, no, I'm sorry, you don't get to play in the NHL. Just because you score goals. I don't care. This is the craziest story. There's going to be lots of show notes in the downstairs in the next day or so that give the whole backstory to it. They announced that they had signed him, and then Gary Bettman, the controversial commissioner for the NHL, came out and made a crazy statement that Boston did not consult the league before this signing, that he could never see a time in which it would be okay for this kid to play in the NHL. there was a lot of gaslighting that took place coming from the higher ups in the Boston Bruins organization. They had a wonderfully contrite statement when they announced the signing, saying they had done due diligence. They had looked into this for a year. They thought long and hard about the decisions that they were making, and they decided that he had shown enough progress and growth, and they were going to take a chance on him. And there was such backlash from this signing from hockey fans, disabled and not, the pain caused to disabled hockey fans and disabled people in general is incalculable and makes me so mad that there's not any planned restitution to those people that were so actively harmed by a sport that they love. Because at no point was the victim of this bullying considered, mentioned, centered, involved in this process, asked their consent to have their names and their stories spread across every major sports outlet across the entire continent of North America. And the gaslighting continued until a Sunday night after all of this pressure from even Boston Bruins players who it was leaked to the media were not happy about this deal. Patrice Bergeron went and spoke publicly on the record saying that signing a player like this goes against the entire culture of the organization. Y'all, the fact that a hockey player said boo about this into a microphone is massive. So I will say, it has been pointed out by the two podcasts that I mentioned earlier that the positive of this is that there was such backlash. The positive is that there are so many people in hockey that said this is not what the sport is, and this is not what we can stand for, and this is not acceptable. And that there was so much pressure that it forced the Bruins to completely course correct within 3 days and announced Sunday night that they were parting ways with defenseman Mitchell Miller. What that means, we don't know. Does he get to keep his signing bonuses? We don't know. He's still under contract with the Bruins as of Tuesday at almost 2 p.m. Eastern. But they have terminated, apparently, their relationship with him. But the Bruins, in their statement Sunday night, and then yesterday, the team president, Cam Neely's statement, said that new information came to light that prompted them to change their minds, which is gaslighting. Because there was no new information that came out in the last 3 days that wasn't available for the last 3 years. He was selected by the Arizona Coyotes in the 4th round of the 2020 draft. And because of the pressure, again, at the time in a much smaller hockey market, the public pressure to end that relationship because of not only his actions, but the fact that he had documentedly shown no remorse. He has never even officially apologized to this young man and his family, aside from sliding into social media DMs after the announcement of his contract. His agent, Eustace King, came out and defended all of the work he's done in restorative justice, which is not restorative justice. I'll explain that in a minute. But all the work he's done with listed all these organizations that he's worked with to help understand the impact of his actions. Gaslighting. Those organizations came out within an hour of the press release and saying, we have never worked with Mitchell Miller. So this entire situation was about framing the public rehabilitation of a young man who has not shown a desire to rehabilitate or make recompense or restitution or restoration. And almost zero concern from the agent, the player, and the Boston Bruins about the victim and their family, which is ironically what, in fact, restorative justice is. Restorative justice is the principle that a relationship has been broken in a community, and it can only be restored through the consent of the victim to engage in a process of restoration and restitution with the offender. That has not happened. We know that has not happened. And for them to claim that it has happened, for Eustace King to use the language of restorative justice to talk about the work that Mitchell Miller hasn't done is disgusting. It's reprehensible. I worked for a restorative justice organization in Northern Ireland. I know how hard that work is. I know how dedicated the people are who work in the fields of restorative justice. And to insult them with this claim, never mind to insult the victim and their family with that claim, was one of the more reprehensible things to come out of this story. But it's a big one. It's a big one for Make It Make Sense, our final segment on our cancel culture watch. Do I think Mitchell Miller is going to be canceled now? No, I think he'll probably continue to play hockey somewhere. Players that had this season been held accountable for their actions in the NHL and had contracts dropped, PTOs dropped, are being picked up in European leagues. The wonderful women at Too Many Men today said, the most upsetting thing about this was that we all knew all along that the Bruins did this because he scores goals. Everybody wants the next Cale Makar. He's not the next Cale Makar, but he has 60 goals in the USHL, so everybody wants to win, and they were not the only team interested in signing this young man, and they didn't care. The truth of, they can say whatever they want about not having enough information. Cam Neely admitted yesterday that they had not talked to the family, and they should have talked to the family. If you are making decisions year-long, according to the Boston Bruins, decisions about who should fit on your team and who should be a part of your organizational culture, and the potential player has this backstory, and you don't speak to the family, you don't care. You care about winning. And I would much rather them just come out and say that honestly and say, we thought we'd get away with it and we didn't. Which is effectively what Cam Neely said by the end of yesterday. I wasn't expecting, paraphrasing, he said, I wasn't expecting this level of backlash. And, he made some bogus statement about how this is a lesson for fathers about how your actions can have repercussions. This is a lesson for all humans, that we should listen to and support victims, and we should require offenders to show real, genuine change before they are given a second chance. Mitchell Miller was given a second chance based on his potential as a hockey player, not based on any of the actions that were legally required of him by the juvenile court in Ohio, and just required by humanity for being a good person. I believe in human beings' capacity to change. I would love to think that he can learn from this and decide to become the person that would be reflective of the honor of an NHL contract. And we'll see what comes of it. But, this could have fit into so many of our segments. But I wanted to put it at the end to talk about it in depth, because it really is one of those, I just make it make sense, man. Make it make sense. The good news, I think, in this is that we can hold institutions and systems and organizations accountable. That is the beauty of the absolute trash heap that Twitter is right now, thanks to Elon Musk, that there was massive, massive online support. There were campaigns to send letters, to make phone calls to the Boston Bruins organization and head office to let them know that it was not okay with the fan base, with NHL fans, with human persons who respect other human persons' right to dignity and respect. And that to me is the good news that I'm going to take from this story. Kristen and I say this almost every time we open our mouths. Institutions will always protect themselves. Systems will always protect themselves because that is what they are built to do. It is incumbent upon us as individuals to force that change to happen, and to advocate for it and to push for it and to work for the change we want to see in these institutions and systems and organizations. So big salute to hockey Twitter, to hockey culture, to fans of the Boston Bruins. Shout out to all the hockey media who has been covering this so well. There's going to be links in the downstairs if you would like to fall down this rabbit hole and my 25-minute rant wasn't enough for you. It's a great example of how the media can help be a part of accountability in reporting things honestly and holding institutions and systems and coaches and leaders to account. So big ups to The Athletic, to Too Many Men, to the reporters, local reporters on the Boston Bruins, all who've done a phenomenal job of highlighting the gaslighting and talking about the importance of holding the Bruins accountable for this decision. And, I agree with Jay. We are applauding Bergie for that statement. It's a low bar for hockey players to speak out about anything, but he leapt over it, and fair dues to him. He did say yesterday, though, I hope now that we can turn the page on this. And myself and several other people have been vocal that is not the kind of language we want around this either. With all love and respect to Patrice Bergeron, I think he's growing through this as a leader, and he's a remarkable leader in the room and in his hockey club and in the sport. But I would push back and say, no, Bergie, we don't need to turn the page on this. We need to publicly keep talking about why this was so bad and how we can continue to support the victims in this case and the families in this case, and continue to push for change within hockey. So that is our cancel culture watch. I would love to not talk about hockey the next time, you guys. Can the NHL just take a break from bad decisions and stupid plays and cultural discussions? I don't know what I want to talk about next, but I know Jay and I have talked about this offline, but I identify as tired. It is really hard to be a hockey fan right now, and it's just one blow after another. So, can we bring back a conversation about Deshaun Watson or something? I know there's always going to be cultural issues to talk about, especially within professional sports, especially within America. Maybe next time we'll be talking about the World Cup in Qatar. I don't know. But that is today's cancel culture watch. Again, this one was a bit lengthier because we were off last week. We're going to be off this next week, coming on the 15th, because Kristen and I are going to be in New Orleans, Louisiana, presenting at the Society of Chemical Manufacturers Association of America annual summit. We're super excited to be in New Orleans. Check out our social media. We'll be doing fun, cultural, and educational things in New Orleans, and also eating beignets. And super excited to talk about retention and engagement and recruitment with our executive roundtable. So we will not be here with cancel culture next week. We will be the week after. hopefully for you, if no one else, Jay, I will have good hockey news. Maybe by then the Pittsburgh Penguins will remember how to win hockey games. I don't know. I'm not going to hold my breath. But we will be back with whatever entries we have to whichever segments they fit under. Maybe by that time I'll have graphics and music. I don't know. It'll be exciting. We're really, really pumped about this reformatting of empathy exercises into cancel culture watch, because culture is all around us. It is in everything. And we are cultural watchers, and we are here to have these discussions with you. So thanks for joining me live. Those of you that did, Blind Dragon and Jay. Hello, replay crew. If you're watching this on the replay, pop it in your AirPods as you're cleaning the kitchen this weekend or what have you. If you want a distraction from election news in the United States, there's a lot of ranting and raving on this hour-long video that doesn't have to do with the United States election or political system. So my gift to you, as always, everybody take care, be well, look after one another, and we will see you in 2 weeks' time. Bye.